Hi there, Scott Wheeler here, and I would like to just answer this question as simply as I can. Does man have a free will? In other words, do we have the freedom to be able to choose? Now, I see very clearly in both the Old and the New Testament many scriptures that are clear concerning man's choice. God saying, I set before you life and death, you choose. We see in the New Testament, he who believes shall be saved. And so I have to believe to be saved. Now, it's then declared by some that if you believe, then you have contributed to your salvation, which is crazy, because the reality is this: Ephesians 2 verse 8 and 9 makes it clear. We are saved by grace. So clearly the declaration is you don't save yourself. It is God who saves you. And it's God's grace that is made available to us through the gospel for our salvation. But we're saved by grace through faith. So that offer is made, the salvation is complete. I could never claim to have added anything to my salvation. All the glory goes to the Lord. It's all of Him, but I have to believe to enter into that grace. And so the believing cannot be counted as a work which contributes to my salvation. It's simply the choice I made to accept and receive the complete work that Jesus made available to me. So I'm saved by God's divine enabling through faith. And of course, not of myself, it is the gift of God. Now, some will say the gift of God is the grace and the offer of salvation and the faith, because you don't even have the faith to believe. God's got to give you the faith to believe. Now, we appreciate that within Calvinistic circles, that is part of God's, as they understand it, election of mankind. And so only those who have been elected by God will God give the faith to respond to the gospel. I don't see that in the scriptures, because if that were the case, then how would God hold me accountable for not believing in the gospel? The believing is my choice, my free will. It's my faith to believe the offer of salvation that God has made, which is complete, and I could add nothing to it. So we read this in the book of Romans chapter 10, and Paul writes in verse 6, and he says, the righteousness that is of faith says, don't say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down from above, or who will ascend into the abyss, that is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we preach. Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. That's all man has to do. Believe in your heart that God has raised Christ from the dead. There's no work involved in that. You're believing on what Jesus has already done. And then to confess with your lips or your mouth Jesus as your Lord. Again, there's no work that you are doing. It is a believing that Jesus has done the work on my behalf, and then a confessing that I'm going to submit to his lordship. It's my faith, my choice, my free will. For with the heart one believes and has righteousness, and with the mouth one confesses and has salvation. Clearly an acceptance of the work that God has done on our behalf. Now, in the book of Hebrews chapter 4, just confirming this, the writer of Hebrews puts it like this. And he says in verse 1, therefore we must be wary that while the promise of entering his rest remains open, none of you seem to come short of it. So there's a rest for the people of God. Now, the rest he's talking about is when you and I enter in to the complete work of salvation, we find eternal rest because we cease from our own works. We stop trying to save ourselves. And so we cease from a gospel of works, and we rest in the grace of God, the completed work of Christ. For we had good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, talking about the children of Israel and the wandering through the wilderness. But the message they heard did them no good, since they did not join with those who heard it in faith, or the King James says they did not mix the word with faith. In other words, they did not believe. The offer was there, the salvation was complete, it was all taken care of by God, but they never entered in because they did not believe. And so if they had believed, they would have entered in. But that would not have been attributed to them as a work, but simply having received what God had already prepared for them. For we who have believed enter that rest. And so faith takes you out of works and into an eternal rest in the completed work of Jesus Christ. As I swore in my anger, they will never enter my rest, and yet God's works were accomplished from the foundation of the world. For he has spoken somewhere about the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. But to repeat the text cited earlier, they will never enter my rest. Therefore it remains for some to enter it. Yet those whom it was previously proclaimed did not enter because of disobedience. They chose to shun the provision of God. They had a free choice. So God ordains again a certain day, today, speaking through David after so long a time, as in the words quoted before, "Oh, that today you would listen as he speaks and do not harden your hearts." I have the choice. I can harden or I can soften my heart. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken afterward about another day. Consequently, a Sabbath rest remains for the children of God. For the one who enters God's rest has also rested from his works, just as God did from his own works. Thus, we must make every effort to enter that rest. I've got to make every effort. I've got to make the choice. I've got to believe to be able to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by following the same pattern of unbelief. And then, just in conclusion, in Galatians chapter 3, verse 6, it puts it like this: just as Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Romans 10, we read there, for with the heart man believes unto righteousness. And so Abraham was not righteous because of any work he did, but because he believed. And so again, clearly, faith cannot be a work that contributes to your salvation. Then he says, so then, understand that those who believe are the sons of Abraham. And so for you and I, we have got to make the choice. Am I going to believe in the gospel? Am I going to believe in God's provision? Am I going to embrace this complete salvation that God has done on my behalf and has made as a free gift to you and I? We cannot attain it by works. We do not deserve it, but we can receive it simply through faith. And so I'm persuaded by this reality that I definitely have a free will.